This is the house where Project Pickled Egg was conceived. And this webinar tells a story about how we got from that point, 3 years later, the dawn of publication of the first book on the Core 7. For at least 50 years, from the mid-1960s, a group of 8 methods formed the bedrock of all surprise major ringing, Standard 8. No one knows quite how they came about or who first called them standard. First evidence of them being rung together in a peal of spliced was this performance in 1939. It was a bit of a one-off. It was possibly that the methods were just forgotten. 1939 was followed by an enforced downturn in method ringing. It was not until the mid-1960s that a couple of composers put together compositions of 8-spliced which used these methods. They just happened to be the methods that were around at the time. And I've spoken to ringers who were active in spliced in that era, and they all think mid to late 60s was when the S word was first used, or certainly when standard was a capital S. Standard 8 became standard by custom and practice, not by thought or design. Books were written about them, more and more compositions were based on them, and most single method quarters and peals are in these 8 methods. And the odd thing is, no one has ever suggested that the Standard 8 are particularly good. To be fair, in the 1960s, there were different views on what made a good method. There were fewer to choose from. You could achieve the holy grail of 144 combination roll-ups in virtually anything. And the best that is said of some of the methods is that they are not that bad. But not that bad isn't really good enough for the bedrock of surprise major ringing. These methods have become entrenched because ringing the same old thing is self-fulfilling. A new ringer can only ring what the rest of the band knows already. The comfort of familiarity is a powerful barrier to change. In the 1980s, Ian Butters suggested a new set of methods which replaced some of the Standard 8 with Cornwall, Cassiobury, Lessness and Glasgow, providing much more variety for ringers and opportunity for composers than the Standard 8 did. As I understand it, this move didn't really come from the standpoint of changing the way ringers learned. It was designed to be just a better set of methods, and it didn't translate into a book or anything like that. It was really only picked up by the peal ringing community. Compositions of Nottingham 8 don't tend to be aimed at the entry-level conductor or band, as can be seen from this non-trivial example. Maybe social media would have helped. Maybe they just didn't try hard enough, or maybe they didn't care enough, or maybe it just didn't have a name which caught the imagination. And beyond the peal ringing community, Nottingham 8 unfortunately failed to dislodge the old order. We need to fast forward to 2017 for the next attempt to challenge the status quo. Now, each year, a group of my ringing friends with kids go on holiday together and rent a big house, this one on that occasion. And one evening, we were sitting in the drawing room having our pre-dinner pints, and I asked this question of the assembled company. If you were choosing a set of methods that would teach ringers how to ring surprise major in a progressive way, what would they be? And we went on to debate and think that for it to work as training, each method would build on what has come before and clear reasoning for why it adds value. We weren't picking a set of methods to create a decent touch of spliced or composition. We weren't saying which of the Standard 8 do we think are rubbish. The question was very specifically about how we would create a pathway from scratch with a clean sheet of paper. And we were all with quite a few members of our target audience, who are our children. We actually thought, what methods would we want to use to introduce these kids to surprise major that would be better than what we had to put up with? We owed it to them. The discussion carried on after the holiday, and I expanded the consultation group, and we started homing in on some ideas. I came up with the analogy of a ringer's larder, stocked with ingredients, the Standard 8, which, although they were safe and edible, didn't really make very good cakes. We thought it was time we restocked these ringers' larders with fresh and more exciting ingredients had been available to previous generations. Ingredients that would not only make better cakes, would also teach people how to cook and how to shop for more. As Philip Ayres said, this will be a larder without any pickled eggs in. And this picture is members of the same group 2 years later celebrating having rung a peal of John Morrison's Pickled Egg 23 spliced to mark the second anniversary of that first conversation. One problem with the question is that there are thousands of rung methods to choose from and a stupidly large number of unrung methods to choose from. So we thought we should filter the results by adding some criteria, which are these. Firstly, methods should have musical or satisfying playing courses. Most of the ringing of these methods at practices will be as plain or shortened courses. Given the choice between a method that gives you 5, 6, 7, 8 roll-ups and one that doesn't, the one that does will be more pleasing and is more likely to be rung. One subject of debate is how one defines what a musical method is. Bell ringers use the word music in a way that musicians don't. We use it to mean particular rows or groups of rows which we find pleasing. In the early days of treble dodging major, keeping the tenors as closely coursing as possible was considered to generate the best music, whereas runs of bells are now in vogue, with methods that generate them favoured over those that do not. Most would agree that the way in which music evolved is also important. Musical rows don't exist in isolation. A broad consideration of what is musical was adopted. Secondly, each method will introduce a new, useful skill, a technique or concept, and hence be progressive. So for each new method would be a particular focus on what the method adds to your existing body of knowledge and why that is useful. Thirdly, it should be easy to ring, at least for the first few methods. Moving from 6 to 8 bells is difficult enough, so the first few surprise major methods should respect that. Now, these methods will be rung in single method quarters and peals, or spliced. A fourth criterion for selection of methods here is that they lend themselves to compositions, both alone and in spliced. In a couple of cases, other factors overwhelmed this restriction, but generally, these are methods that composers love. Last point was a particularly interesting one, which was most debated. Do these methods need to be ones people already know? And by that, I mean the helpers, the other members of bands. If you are allowed a completely clean sheet of paper, a brand new set of methods could be created, which were molded perfectly to the objectives. Now, I argued against that. I felt that if we had methods no one knew, just wouldn't be the opportunities for learners to get the experience. We needed to have ingredients that existing ringers knew how to cook with. And I think that the consultees thought about it, and the more they came round to realizing that I might be right. So now I'm going to move on to the actual methods and the discussions that surrounded them. I'm not going to describe the methods themselves in particular detail. This is all about understanding the rationale for their selection. Now, believe it or not, the inclusion of Cambridge was fiercely debated. To show the strength of feeling, 2 of the initial comments were these. It's worth analysing, thinking between those 2 different standpoints. The top comment can be seen to be the view of the purist. This view is that if you're really trying to design the progression of learning surprise, Cambridge is clearly not the place to start. It's really quite difficult. The jump from what you are previously likely to have rung is huge. It doesn't have a particularly special playing course. It has limiting falseness, which is one of the reasons why it took so long for Peal of Cambridge to be first rung. So starting with Cambridge immediately seemed to undermine our credibility. Second comment, though, is the view of the pragmatist. For Project Pickled Egg to succeed, it needs to be adopted by ringers generally. Too radical, and you will not carry majority. So the benefits or justification of Cambridge. Every other ringer who knows at least one surprise method knows it. And this is very important because if you turn up at the tower and there are 6 other surprise major ringers there, you will be able to ring a course of Cambridge. And that helps in adoption, especially for you at the start. It's likely to be the first surprise minor method learned, but the basic structure, or at least the elements thereof, will be known. It teaches about extension because learners will know the minor and it extends well on higher numbers. Various features of Cambridge minor, the places, the place on the front, the double dodge, lie dodge, lead and dodge. These are all bits of work you'll use again. Nothing when you learn Cambridge is going to be wasted. We care whether the methods extend. It does give you an easy route into the methods on 10 and 12. It's not hugely important, but it's a minor factor. And it's in structure, which provides many building blocks for other methods. The same could be said of Yorkshire, though if that came first. But as I said, bits of Cambridge will stand you in good stead. So Yorkshire was the second method considered. Yorkshire is another staple in our current larder, and a method learned first or second by the vast majority of those who set out to ring surprise major. Unlike with Cambridge, the jury did not spend much time deliberating on the merits of Yorkshire. In fact, there was hardly a bad word said about it. Arguments for the Yorkshire's inclusion based on the selection criteria, a relatively easy way of being able to know another method. So yes, it introduces a different Cambridge above method with the same lead end order, and so it is a relatively easy way of learning your second method. Ringers do find it quite difficult at first to even ring 2 methods in spliced, so adding an easy one is beneficial. Yorkshire becomes a very useful method on higher numbers for inexperienced bands, so getting to know it on 8 is helpful. I'll talk a little bit about that in a moment. It's a reasonably musical playing course, which extends well higher numbers. Virtually every other ringer who knows at least 2 surprise major methods knows it, so it's very accessible. That's just like the argument in Cambridge. If you meet with 6 others, it's likely you'll also be able to ring a course of Yorkshire. And it's relatively easy to learn, more so than Yorkshire is, in fact. Now, when I started off this project, there was a lot of consultation with other ringers. It wasn't just the original group, all of whom were very experienced ringers. I needed to know what people who were in the process of learning surprise major thought, and I think this is part of the success of it. And one such consultee said of Yorkshire, it's really useful because so many other things are Yorkshire-y in one way or another. It teaches lots of transferable skill, and you're probably going to get a rock-steady band to ring around you. Which is in fact as much an argument for learning it first, not second. Short Yorkshire places, the dodge, place, place, dodge, are very common in other methods, whereas long Cambridge places are rare. If we review these methods, say in 10 years' time, it could be the time to drop Cambridge, maybe just start with Yorkshire. The point about Yorkshire being useful on higher numbers for inexperienced bands is because bells stay in coursing order below and above the treble in Yorkshire, whereas in Cambridge they don't. They only course above the treble. This may not seem important or even noticeable on 8, but it does become more noticeable the more bells you ring it on. Keeping course bells together above and below the treble makes the method easier to ring and easier to conduct, hence the origin of the phrase Yorkshire and score. So that's the first 2 methods in the larder, and not particularly exciting so far. So it's time for a trip to the Delhi counter. In the 1941 ringing world, there was a debate on standard methods, and an unnamed correspondent forwarded the case for Cornwall surprise, which had been first rung at Helmingham in Suffolk 5 years earlier. It drew attention to its many qualities. It has most of the good features we hope for in a method except difficulty, they said. There is no awkward or uncomfortable work, they claimed. And yet, the progress of surprise major continued without paying much attention to Cornwall for some reason. and it didn't make it into the 8 splice composition which cemented standard 8, which was tragic. Cornwall made it into the Nottingham 8 and is the third method in MBD's Renaissance series, one of the first methods in Norman Smith's 23 splice progression, and it even made AJB's suggested 12. So why do these titans of the exercise rate Cornwall so highly? Well, where should we start? There are actually 2 pages of reasons why Cornwall should be a core method, and I'm not even going to dwell on them for too long. No method was more universally acclaimed among the early contributors to this project than Cornwall. John Morrison argued that it should be learned first, and that ringers who have followed this alternative path in North America have done quite well at it, and have found it easier than the Cambridge above methods. If one was to suggest a pathway into surprise major that might be easier than learning Cambridge minor and Cambridge major, it would be to ring Kent minor, then Norwich, then Cornwall, with perhaps some double Norwich thrown in. I would love to try that with some people. For all its merit, an experienced ringer's belief that it should be easy, not everyone agrees. One of the problems cited is that the various different features of the blue line can be used with those in Lessness, which is often learned around the same time. Now, more experienced ringers who don't see why this should be the case because they understand structure may just be wrong. Some play spells are not particularly memorable or distinctive compared with Cambridge. So this really does enforce the learning of bells methods by their structures. When Cornwall was introduced into the St. Martin's Guild, people liked it. It wasn't necessarily easier than other surprise major methods, and it may well be the case of Cornwall being easier to ring once learned rather than being easier to ring initially. But Cornwall, a great method, and more than deserves its place in the larder. Another method sailed through early consultation was superlative. It scores pretty well against the criteria set for larder selection. The concept it's introducing are the double method and non-coursing pairs meeting at the back. It emphasizes the importance of learning play spells very well, particularly the issues with fifth play spell. Doesn't just go up to the back. The 5 dodge across the half lead is good for learning how to count dodges, and it's also useful for trying to get people to not count 5 dodges and see it by watching the treble or hearing for the treble. Last point there was something that was said by Project Pickled Egg Facebook group participants, which I'd not thought of. I asked what features of superlative were useful to people who've been learning surprise major methods more recently than my original collaborators, and they said that in all the methods you come across up to this point, you're going from front to back with less or more distractions on the way, but ultimately you get where you're going. Superlative, you turn around earlier, and we know that that catches people out. The 3 of the methods discussed so far were also in the standard 8. So I'm going to look now at which methods didn't make it and why. It's time for a quick reminder of exactly what we're trying to do here. The object of Project Pickled Egg is to find this set of core methods to help ringers learn to ring surprise major in a progressive way. And at the same time, the method should also form satisfying groups to be rung together. These are not training methods to be cast aside once a stage is reached. And just to recap on the selection criteria, musical in the playing course introduces a useful new skill, technique, or concept, and hence is progressive. Not have limiting falseness, which restricts composers. Familiarity is helpful because your helpers need to know it. Now, you could possibly argue for Pudsey if you are feeling generous. Pudsey is the only one of these 3 that anyone ever demonstrates particular fondness for. Pudsey starts are quite common in other methods, and there are better methods with Pudsey starts if that's the only reason for having it. Cassiobury went into the Nottingham 8, for instance. We've already got 3 methods with this lead end order, Cambridge lead end order. But C just doesn't really move you forward enough to warrant inclusion, and it's not compelling. If you are arguing for Rutland, you might say that it's another Cambridge above method with a different lead end order to Cambridge and Yorkshire. Introducing a different lead end order enables you to ring shorter and more interesting touches of spliced, which also serves to emphasize the importance of knowing these spell starts. If your band is not ready to tackle sort of spliced, as well as learning a different above work, then Rutland could help. But again, it's not compelling. And Lincolnshire was not compelling for any reasons whatsoever. So if you're setting out to learn surprise major, these three methods don't take you any further forward compared with other methods you might learn. Not bad methods, not going to poison you. They don't add enough value, interest, or variety to make it into Project Pickled Egg. If you want something that's a diversion at the same sort of level, I include try also methods. I recommend Paramara and Painswick. But it's important for Project Pickled Egg's success. There isn't a zealous denunciation of these methods. Nothing upsets people who cling to the Standard 8 or who like the Standard 8 more than people saying that these methods are rubbish. They're just not in. Now, including a method with the Uxbridge backwork ticks the need for PPE methods to show some progression, as it's the basis for so many methods. So why not choose Uxbridge? After all, backwork is named after Uxbridge, and many ringers have learned Uxbridge because it comes so early in Norman Smith's composition of 23 spliced. Both methods were first rung around the same time, 1936-37. If you look at quarter peel statistics over the last 10 years, it's interesting, and peel statistics, relative numbers of quarters of the two have stayed about the same until the last couple of years, with Lessness now edging ahead. Peel ringers, however, have increasingly bumped for Lessness, and there have now been more than 3 times as many peels of Lessness as Uxbridge. Which is odd in a way, because although Lessness has a more musical playing course, on the basis that a couple of 5, 6, 7, 8s off the front tends to be more of a crowd pleaser than anything in the playing course of Uxbridge, peel compositions can generate similar music in either method. Lessness's popularity probably stems from its inclusion in the Nottingham 8, which came to prominence as a peel composition and hasn't really penetrated into the quarter peel or developmental ringing communities. Quarter peel community may now just be on trend. Choosing Lessness over Uxbridge was pretty marginal. Lessness is now the more rung method, and as I'm expecting these methods to be learned and rung in plain courses and short touches of spliced, having the method that has a better playing course and some familiar blue line elements is a better choice. So Uxbridge would have been a retrograde step. Now, with my larder analogy, I likened Bristol to sugar, part of the staple diet, definitely a treat as well. As with superlative, in the early consultation, there wasn't a bad word said about Bristol. It is what we call a shoe-in. The list of plus points could have gone on forever, so he left it at these. I'll just pick out one there, MX methods. I haven't talked much about the lead end groups of methods, and I've dropped the discussion of lead head groups from the forthcoming book on the Core 7 because we decided it didn't really matter. When I was learning surprise major methods, I neither knew nor cared what the lead end group designation was. I knew if things were Cambridge lead end order, or if they were, in those days, Rutland lead end order. I didn't know that they were B or F. I knew what MX was, though. MX meant something special, like having turbo written on the back of your car. MX methods have this repeating lead feature. When a bob is called, all the bells above where the bob is made lodge at the lead end, then go back and ring the same lead again. This has a number of good practical effects, the most important of which at this stage is that it enables you to ring a 3-lead touch, give each person less to learn. So there's a relatively low entry point in terms of what you need to learn to ring Bristol, and a high reward for having done so. Those relatively new to surprise major learning gave me a few other useful and interesting observations on Bristol. Knowledge of Stedman was considered an advantage. That would introduce the Stedman whole turn work, which appears a lot in Bristol, and the concept of doing a point, which would otherwise be new, and wrong hunting. Many thought that the line of Bristol was quite difficult to get to grips with, for obvious reasons, and it's a line that's difficult to get back onto once you've fallen off it. Essentially, it's easier to get right in a set of places or a dodge than a fluid mix of wrong hunting, points, etc., especially if the conductor is using terminology that's unfamiliar. So people ask what order to learn these methods in. In the forthcoming book, we've put it sixth for London. In the Ringing World articles, I discussed it for Lessness. Bristol may well come earlier than this because of the ability to ring it in short chunks, and also because it has the badge of honour factor. And there are places where you're more likely to find 6 people who can ring Bristol than who can ring Lessness. And finally, London. This was another method, like Cambridge, where in strict analysis of the original list of credentials for a method, it didn't really cut the mustard. There was a lot of discussion about London, and it possibly survived because there is nothing quite like it to replace it with. It's not an easy method to learn. It has an unremarkable playing course. Its falseness doesn't make it ideal. It certainly isn't traditional musically, although people who like London really like it. London Major is a big jump in difficulty for all those first learning it, but it's well worth having this level of difficulty in the first 7 methods learned. The wrong hunting feature on the front, fishtails, and other bits of the line of London Major are all very common features of other methods. There is little here you won't use again. And most ringers have a real sense of achievement when they first manage to ring a course of London. One consideration for an alternative was to include Kenning Hall. Kenning Hall is Cornwall, but with wrong hunting on 4 below the treble. So that would serve to isolate that particular feature of methods in something not as hard as London. But in the end, we left London in the course 7 and introduced Kenning Hall later, but with a lot of cross-references. The London got in really because it's too difficult to leave out. It's an iconic method, historically important. It's in some classic compositions like Whitman's 4, and it certainly introduces new features. I had always thought knowing London Minor was a benefit to learning London Major. Not everyone agrees. I had some people say London Minor seemed quite different and didn't help at all. It's certainly the case that the structure of London is a bit squashed on 6. It becomes apparent on 8, and it comes into its own on 10. Project Pickled Egg aimed to develop a group of surprise major methods to replace the standard 8 with the degree of thought, consultation, and follow-up resource that could have traction. It aimed to be a set of core methods that would teach ringers how to ring surprise major in a progressive way, with each additional method building on what's gone before and clear reasoning for why it adds value. Standard 8 was never designed to do that. Standard 8 was never designed at all, and yet it has been used as a learning pathway for 50 years. There is a great variety in surprise major ringing without just making methods more difficult, and the standard 8 hardly scratches the surface. Neither does the core 7, to be fair. The follow-on methods, which will be the subject of the next talk, explores the world of opportunity much more, and they are a key part of the project. This goes much further than Standard 8 ever tried to do. I was keen from the start that the number of core methods should not be 8. Avoid any direct comparison with the Standard 8. What the initial consultees found was that it was not too difficult to define this first 7. But after that, the choices and paths start to diverge as there are lots of different options. So the core methods stopped at 7. Now, although that would be a nice place to finish, I've got one more thing to talk about, and that is to address some of the criticism. First of which is, it's got a stupid name. There were definitely some people, some traditionalists, who didn't want to have anything to do with Project Pickled Egg because they thought it sounded stupid. But for many others, that's been the attraction. It's had a certain branding about it, and branding is important. All you've done is drop Lincolnshire, Pudsey and Rutland and put in Cornwall and Lessness. Well, yes, that's true. It doesn't mean it's wrong. Much of the reason for keeping in so many methods that are well known is that familiarity is so helpful. It's the methods in the next section are perhaps even more important. We don't want you telling us what to ring. That's a problem for any organisation. People don't want to think we're imposing these methods. People have got to ring the Project Pickled Egg methods because they read a book, they watch a webinar, they decide for themselves, or they're told by their peers, this is what is worth doing. There's no point telling someone not to learn Lincolnshire if that's the only other method the plan knows. I think it will take time. It will take time for more people to know Turramurra than who know Lincolnshire. I'm not going to say that you shouldn't learn Lincolnshire if everyone else knows it. It's just that Turramurra is not much more difficult. In some ways, it's easier. It's not a huge step. And then a couple of perhaps more light-hearted comments. One from Jack Page: Cornwall is getting boring. Every single practice I go to, they're ringing Cornwall. He's still saying that. It's true. It's got penetration. People are getting to ring it, and people are enjoying it. We were ringing Cornwall long before Simon Linford told us that we should be ringing it. That was a comment from Rick Shawcross. And I think Rick thought that I was somehow claiming that Cornwall was my great discovery, or maybe I'd even invented it. But it was a great discovery in 1941. All I'm doing is bringing it to more people's attention. It's not a unique discovery. So that's the end. That's the end of Project Pickled Egg. From its inception in that house in 2017, the dawn of the publication of the first book on the Core 7. I hope that's been interesting, and you look forward to the second webinar in this series, which will look at all the other methods that make up Project Pickled Egg.